What happens when a sports league realizes its biggest star doesn't actually need it anymore? Not emotionally, not symbolically, not theoretically, but financially, contractual, and publicly. That's exactly the situation unfolding right now. Caitlin Clark, the rookie who flipped ticket sales, shattered viewership records, and forced mainstream sports media to finally pay attention, has reportedly received a warning from the WNBA regarding her partnership with NBC. Not a congratulations. Not a celebration. A warning. Let that sink in. Instead of leaning into the moment, marketing it as proof that one of their players is becoming a national sports voice, or using it to elevate the entire league, they allegedly questioned whether her NBC role could be a conflict of interest. And that one phrase may end up defining this era of women's basketball. Because this isn't just about television appearances. It isn't just about contracts. It's about control. It's about power. It's about what happens when a generational star grows faster than the system built to contain her. For years, the WNBA operated in a stable structure. Modest ratings, predictable growth, a loyal core fanbase, and a tight ecosystem. Then Caitlin Clark arrived, and everything accelerated. A rookie became the headline. A five-figure salary player became the center of billion-dollar conversations. A league used to flying under the radar suddenly trended every single week. That kind of growth changes relationships. When the spotlight gets that bright, the conversation shifts from, "How do we survive?" to "Who controls this?" And that's where this story really begins. Before we even get to the NBC deal, before the alleged warning, before locker room whispers or executive pressure, we need to talk about one number. One number that explains everything. A number most casual fans scroll past without realizing its meaning. Caitlin Clark's rookie salary is roughly $70,000. In professional sports, that isn't mid-tier. It isn't star level. It isn't franchise money. It's entry-level. And that matters. Because while Clark is selling out arenas, moving merchandise at a record pace, and driving TV ratings the league hasn't seen in years, her base league paycheck doesn't reflect her impact. Now compare that to her 8-figure endorsement deals, national campaigns, shoe contracts, and a major NBC role covering basketball at the highest level, including NBA and Olympic coverage. The financial gap isn't small, it's massive. And here's where tension forms. When your side opportunities pay exponentially more than your primary employer, the power dynamic shifts quietly at first, then all at once. For decades, leagues held leverage because they controlled access, exposure, and relevance. But in the nil era, the creator economy, and the age of personal brands and social media dominance, an athlete can become bigger than the platform itself. Caitlin Clark isn't just an employee clocking in for games. She's a brand. She's a ratings driver. She's appointment television. And here's the part that makes executives uncomfortable. The numbers prove it. When she plays, viewership spikes. Road attendance jumps. Engagement explodes. That's not opinion, it's measurable. Now imagine being a league office watching your rookie, your lowest paid contract player, command more national attention than the league itself. It creates an imbalance. And imbalances create fear. If the player doesn't financially depend on the league the way previous generations did, the league loses its biggest piece of leverage. Think about it. In traditional sports structures, players needed the league contract. That was their main source of income. Endorsements came later. Now, for generational stars, it's the opposite. Endorsements come first. Media deals come first. Personal brand comes first. The league becomes one part of the ecosystem, not the center of it. That shift changes negotiations, behavior, and authority. If Clark earns multiples of her WNBA salary through NBC, what real threat does a warning carry? A fine? A suspension? When an athlete's financial security isn't tied to the league payroll, the risk calculation is completely different. That's why this moment feels bigger than a standard compliance issue. It's a stress test, not just for Clark, but for the WNBA's entire business model. If one rookie can wield this level of outside leverage, what happens when the next generational star arrives? What about future players entering the league already built as global brands? Does the WNBA adapt or clamp down? The NBC deal wasn't just a contract. It was a signal. A signal that Clark's influence extends beyond the hardwood. A signal she isn't confined to one logo. A signal her career trajectory may not follow the traditional path. For league executives watching this unfold, there's a choice to make: embrace it or regulate it. Because the warning, whether procedural or symbolic, sends a clear message: we still control the structure. But in modern sports economics, control doesn't come from paperwork. It comes from audience loyalty, from cultural relevance. And that's where things get complicated. If fans tune in for one player, if sponsors align with one personality, if networks build programming around one name, the leverage isn't in the commissioner's office anymore, it's with the star. And that reality may be the most disruptive part of the entire situation. But money alone doesn't tell the whole story. If this were just about salary gaps, negotiations would stay quiet. This feels louder, more personal. Beyond finances, a deeper conflict emerges: visibility, influence. The question of whether promoting the NBA through NBC somehow threatens the WNBA's identity. Enter the phrase that changed everything: conflict of interest. It sounds professional, neutral, and legal. But what does it really mean here? The concern reportedly is that Clark's NBC partnership, a network covering NBA and Olympic broadcasts, could somehow dilute her WNBA commitment. Pause there. That's where it gets tricky. NBC isn't just airing basketball. It's one of the most powerful sports media companies in the world. They build stars, package moments into cultural events. And now, Caitlin Clark is tied to that machine. From the league's perspective, the anxiety makes sense on the surface. If your biggest star is appearing on national broadcasts, covering NBA storylines, promoting Olympic coverage, and expanding her presence beyond the WNBA, does that shift where her loyalty lies? Does it blur brand alignment? Does she start becoming bigger than the league itself? But here's the counter-argument fans immediately recognize. How does promoting basketball hurt basketball? If Clark references the WNBA during an Olympic segment, that's free advertising. If she interviews an NBA star and millions tune in, those are potential new WNBA fans. Visibility is currency, and Clark brings it everywhere she goes. So the idea that exposure weakens the league feels fragile. The real fear isn't exposure, it's control. When a player becomes a broadcaster, their influence extends beyond locker rooms and post-game press conferences. They gain a voice independent of team structures. That independence can be powerful. Historically, leagues prefer centralized messaging, controlled interviews, media days, and press releases. NBC isn't controlled by the WNBA. It's global, independent. And once a player has that national microphone, their influence is unfiltered. They aren't just answering questions, they are shaping discussions. For a league still solidifying its mainstream identity, that unpredictability feels risky. There's very little precedent here. Active players don't typically take major national broadcasting roles tied to networks that also cover the NBA and Olympics. This is uncharted territory. And when organizations enter new territory, they either evolve or tighten the rules. So the warning, procedural, precautionary, or aggressive, may reflect uncertainty more than hostility. But perception matters. Publicly, it doesn't look like caution. It looks like pushback. Resistance. A league uncomfortable with how fast one player's platform is growing. And once the phrase "official warning" circulated, the narrative exploded. Fans weren't dissecting legal nuances. They were asking one question: why would you threaten the player driving your growth? Emotional reaction spreads faster than contract clauses. Consider this. If Clark were making $20 million per year from the WNBA, the league would have much more authority to dictate outside obligations. That's standard. But when the primary contract is modest and the external deals are massive, the balance of power shifts. Outside opportunities no longer look like distractions. They look like smart career moves. And that's why the conflict of interest argument starts to feel shaky. The modern athlete isn't just a player. They are a multi-platform figure. Podcast host, media personality, broadcaster, brand. Players today aren't just athletes. They invest in companies. They collaborate with networks. They become content creators. The line between player and personality has blurred. Caitlin Clark isn't just a shooting guard, she's a content driver. And networks want that. Leagues, however, historically move slower than culture. When culture accelerates faster than governance, tension builds. That tension is exactly what we're seeing now. It's not about a villain or a hero. It's a system trying to figure out how to handle a star who doesn't fit the old mold. Add another layer. Executives don't operate in isolation. They hear from owners, veteran players, union leadership, and stakeholders. If enough voices raise concerns about fairness, focus, or precedent, pressure forms, and pressure influences decisions. That's where the whispers start, and suddenly, the story gets volatile. Some insiders believe this wasn't just about contracts or network affiliations. They believe it started inside the locker room. And once you explore that, the narrative shifts. Now it's about people, not paperwork. For months, there's been a quiet undercurrent in the WNBA. Not visible in post-game interviews, but clear in body language, comments, and subtle reactions. Veterans who played overseas to supplement income, who built the league when arenas were half full, suddenly see a 22-year-old rookie take the spotlight. Instantly. Cameras, schedules, national media coverage, all change. The hierarchy shifts. Competitiveness and pride are normal. Professional jealousy exists everywhere. But this is economic whiplash. From modest recognition to seeing a newcomer land 8-figure endorsements before playing a professional minute, the ecosystem moves faster than culture can adjust. Charter flight discussions accelerate. TV contracts renegotiate. Sponsors get energized. And it all revolves around one name, creating friction even when smiles are for the cameras. Clark isn't just popular, she's commercially dominant. Ratings spike when she plays. Arenas sell out when she travels. Merchandise numbers surge. That affects revenue sharing, CBA negotiations, and bargaining leverage. Veteran players, who fought for higher salaries for years, suddenly see the league flush with attention tied to one rookie. Emotionally complicated, even if they know intellectually it benefits everyone. Now imagine those emotions in union meetings: fairness, workload, marketing distribution, and preferential treatment. These are real conversations. And when enough voices question the optics of a star taking major media roles, league executives listen. No commissioner wants division. No leadership wants the perception that one player plays by different rules. That's how the warning narrative becomes layered. Compliance? Sure. Optics? Absolutely. Locker room equilibrium? Critical. But here's the paradox. Trying to level the field in a star-driven league can backfire. Fans don't see union dynamics. They see outcomes. And when outcomes appear to restrict the player driving growth, public sympathy swings fast. That's dangerous territory. Psychologically, Clark didn't enter quietly. She arrived with national attention, built-in expectations, and a pre-built audience. That can overshadow established stars, even if those veterans intellectually recognize the benefit. Professional sports are about identity, legacy, and recognition. When conversation pivots to one name, it can feel like a razor to those who built the foundation. Pressure builds, questions are raised, and leadership acts. Not to suppress, but to manage a rapidly shifting ecosystem. Modern fans don't respond well to containment of talent. They want greatness amplified, not equilibrium. That difference, internal stability versus external momentum, creates a fault line. Structure versus acceleration. Right now, those forces are colliding. The locker room theory alone doesn't explain everything. This is also about numbers. Once the metrics are undeniable, the power dynamic shifts. The WNBA operated with predictable growth, steady, gradual, modest. Then one player enters, ratings spike, road games sell out, merchandise surges, and national media coverage intensifies. That acceleration isn't cosmetic, it's structural. In pro sports, revenue dictates authority. Revenue follows attention. When one player drives that attention, their leverage rises, whether executives admit it or not. Major media rights negotiations were underway. Networks and sponsors analyzed engagement metrics. Then a rookie's numbers start shifting projections. Broadcast deals hinge on future value. Clark isn't just a player, she's a financial variable influencing boardroom decisions. Imagine presenting growth charts to investors. The upward curve aligns with one name. Suddenly, questions arise. What if she leaves? What if she's restricted? What if she feels undervalued? Discomfort for any league. No organization wants dependency on one individual. Star-driven leagues have existed. Michael Jordan in the NBA, Tiger Woods in the PGA, and Conor McGregor in the UFC. When stars transcend the sport, they reshape the business model. The WNBA may now be experiencing its first true version of that phenomenon, amplified by modern social media, where every rumor spreads instantly and every warning becomes a headline. Now the power dynamic is cultural, not just financial. Fans tune in for Clark. Sponsors align with Clark. Networks build around Clark. Disciplining her, even minimally, carries outsized risk because public sentiment follows the star, and public sentiment drives sponsorship, which drives revenue. This is the ecosystem. Interconnected. Complex. The league faces a strategic dilemma. Ignore internal rules and risk locker room resentment, or enforce rules and risk public backlash. Either path has consequences. Internal tension can often be managed quietly.
Public outrage?
Harder to contain. Fans vote with viewership, tickets, and subscriptions. Digital backlash escalates faster than executive meetings can respond. Add in sponsors. Major brands invest in personalities, not just leagues. Nike didn't sign a logo. Sponsors didn't sign abstract logos. They signed Caitlin Clark. State Farm didn't invest in a policy, they invested in a face. And if a conflict between the league and its biggest commercial asset escalates publicly, sponsors notice. They don't want instability. They don't want controversy overshadowing campaigns. They want growth. And right now, that growth is tied closely to one individual's visibility. That creates silent leverage, the kind not written into contracts but extremely influential behind closed doors. Suddenly, phrases like "bigger than the league" start circulating online. Emotionally, that triggers defensiveness. No league wants to admit dependency. But in measurable business terms, dependency can happen unintentionally, especially during fragile growth periods. The WNBA is expanding. Media dollars are increasing. National exposure is rising. Momentum is fragile. Positive optics and unity are critical. A public dispute with your primary growth driver? That's volatile. Investors get nervous. Executives get cautious. Sponsors watch closely. The question becomes, does the league truly have leverage, or does enforcing policy risk far more than accommodating Clark? Once a star's economic impact outweighs her contractual salary, traditional leverage erodes. Quietly, until a moment like this exposes it. And the equation gets bigger. Enter NBC, a global corporate giant with legal muscle, Olympic programming, and NBA rights. Factor them in, and suddenly this isn't league versus player, it's potentially league versus network. That's a very different fight. This isn't a small-time analyst role. NBC invested in Clark as a face. She's integrated into long-term campaigns, Olympic storytelling, and cross-platform promotions. Restricting that relationship isn't negotiating with a player. It's bumping against a corporate machine. Comcast owns NBC. Its valuation dwarfs the WNBA. Escalating a warning into suspension or obstruction. Legal complexity explodes. NBC isn't passive. Their lawyers' hourly rates exceed some player salaries. They don't let external entities disrupt programming. Timing matters. The Los Angeles Olympics are approaching. NBC's coverage strategy has been years in the making. Clark is part of that long-term arc. Interference from a small league? High risk. A warning may be procedural. Escalation? Corporate conflict. And corporate conflict rarely favors the smaller entity. But beyond legal risk, there's perception. Clark's NBC deal signals she isn't just a player, she's a multi-platform media presence. Leagues historically struggle when athletes outgrow traditional roles because adaptation is required. NBC, giving her a microphone subtly, but powerfully positions her as an authority. Influence outside league control is uncomfortable for institutions built on centralized messaging. Here's the paradox. Every time Clark appears nationally discussing basketball, she reinforces her association with the sport. Restricting exposure doesn't shrink her platform. It risks shrinking the league's alignment with it. Fans see Clark on NBC, the NBA, and Olympic coverage. If the WNBA resists, a brand perception gap widens. And perception drives long-term loyalty. Strategy is critical. Collaborate to maximize promotion, or protect boundaries at the expense of momentum. Momentum is fragile. Clark has created rare acceleration, decades of league chasing. But moments like this create friction during growth. And here's the key imbalance. NBC doesn't need the WNBA. The WNBA benefits from NBC exposure far more than the reverse. Leverage often comes down to dependency. Clark's brand is portable, the league's is centralized. Miscalculate that imbalance, and consequences ripple quickly. Now imagine escalation. A warning becomes enforcement. Enforcement becomes suspension. Social media ignites. Outrage is instant. Disbelief, anger, mobilization. Fans don't just complain. They trend hashtags, cancel subscriptions, flood sponsor comment sections, and create viral narratives faster than official statements. Sponsors are hypersensitive. They avoid instability attached to marketing spend. If controversy drags on, they question sustainability, brand alignment, and whether to distance themselves. Financial consequences emerge, not from rules, but optics. Suspending Clark doesn't silence her. It amplifies her. Star, symbol. Athlete, emblem of empowerment versus institutional control. Fans rally. Even neutrals take sides. Add the modern reality. Clark doesn't rely on league salary. Punishment is symbolic, not economic. And symbolic punishment in the social media era backfires. Narrative flips. The league punished its biggest star. Ripple effects follow. Attendance dips, viewership drops, and media focuses on controversy instead of growth. Momentum stalls. Sponsors notice. Revenue declines. Even in the short term, the perception validates Clark's disproportionate value, strengthening her leverage upon return. Enforcement could paradoxically increase her influence. Zoom out. Fans follow personalities, not logos.
Clark removed?
Fans disengage and redirect attention. Momentum is fragile. Attention is easier captured than regained. Networks notice dips in viewership. Media rights negotiations factor in volatility risk. One enforcement decision can affect years of revenue projections. And here's the twist. Warnings may be testing boundaries, not intending escalation. Signals can misfire. Once public sentiment hardens, reversing the narrative is almost impossible. Uncomfortable truth. The league doesn't want a fight. Clark doesn't need one. But in confrontation, only one side risks existential damage. Clark's brand is portable. The league's is centralized. Centralized brands are more vulnerable to mass backlash. That imbalance makes this situation extremely delicate. Finally, the long-term consequence is bigger than this season. It's a message to the next generation. Future stars, Paige Butcher, Juju Watkins, Hannah Hidalgo, and top high school prospects are watching. Nil-era athletes already earn 7 figures before stepping on a professional court. They don't see themselves as just players, they see themselves as brands. They've built audiences, negotiated deals, and understand leverage at 19. A decade ago, the league held authority because it controlled the gateway. Today, authority is fragmented. Stars can exist outside league control. And Clark is leading the way. Future stars are already watching. They may have podcasts, streaming deals, major endorsements, media training, and direct fan engagement platforms. So when they see the league navigating its biggest star publicly, they aren't just witnessing drama, they are evaluating risk. Questions run quietly through their minds. If I build my platform independently, will I face pushback? If I become bigger than the system expects, will it resist me? Will expansion be allowed or constrained? Opportunity now means flexibility, and flexibility is currency in modern sports. Imagine Paige Butcher seeing this unfold. She's already a household name, understands media attention, and sees the league grappling with external success. That sends a subtle signal. Caution is part of the path forward. Now consider Juju Watkins, whose college games already generate national buzz. She's growing up in the influencer era, understands brand equity instinctively, and sees headlines about conflict over outside visibility. She takes notes because elite athletes think long-term, beyond contracts, beyond stats. They think about narrative control and identity ownership. The WNBA is at a crossroads. It can be a launchpad, amplifying star growth across platforms, or a gatekeeper, protecting structure even if it slows expansion. That difference matters to the next generation. In the nil era, players can monetize, they're independently, build communities, and sustain influence without league approval. The league's value proposition must evolve. This is where you grow, not just where you play. If Clark's NBC partnership is framed as a conflict, future stars may hesitate before committing their identity to one ecosystem. Not out of rebellion, but pragmatism. Momentum is rare. Perception shapes recruitment. Trust determines long-term alignment. The league isn't wrong to want structure. Rules exist for fairness, integrity, and consistency. The issue is whether rules evolve with culture, because culture has shifted dramatically in 5 years. Athletes are no longer confined to one lane. They are entrepreneurs, media personalities, investors, influencers, content creators, and advocates. The next generation expects that flexibility to be embraced, not challenged. This moment isn't just about Clark. It's about signaling to the future. Are you allowed to expand freely, or must expansion be negotiated cautiously? If caution is prioritized, elite prospects may explore overseas leagues or hybrid career models. Not disloyalty, but pragmatism. At its core, this is about control. Structure collides with stardom. Institutional authority collides with individual influence. The question stops being, what does the contract say? And becomes, who controls the spotlight? For decades, leagues operated hierarchically. Logos came first. Players were essential but replaceable. Media appearances were controlled. Brand growth was incremental. The digital era shattered that structure. Players can now build global followings without league permission. Caitlin Clark may be the first true stress test of this shift. She arrived with momentum, long before her rookie contract. Networks recognized it. When NBC stepped in, they didn't borrow the league's authority, they borrowed hers. The subtle shift. Networks now sometimes elevate players directly, bypassing leagues. That doesn't mean leagues lose relevance, but it does mean control becomes shared, and shared control requires adaptation. Institutions value consistency. When equilibrium is disrupted, instincts are to stabilize, clarify boundaries, and assert authority. Preservation can look like resistance. Resistance in a growth phase can look like insecurity, especially when fans are emotionally invested in the star driving momentum. Fans don't analyze governance philosophy. They see impact. They ask simple questions. Is the product better with Clark fully empowered or constrained? That emotional judgment often outweighs structural nuance. Executives naturally feel tension when overshadowed by their own star. Dependency feels risky. No commissioner wants headlines suggesting one athlete defines the league. But counterpoint, leagues grow through stars. Every major sports boom, Jordan, Tiger, Serena, proved it. Protect hierarchy or ride the wave. History shows riding the wave expands influence. Women's basketball is at an inflection point, transitioning from niche growth to mainstream relevance. That requires boldness, new models, and acknowledging that athlete empowerment is a catalyst, not a threat. Transitions are messy. They challenge legacy thinking. They test flexibility. Clark's NBC deal is the first major collision between the old structure and the new era dynamics. This isn't just about her. It's about the next decade of professional women's basketball. Will it follow old governance models, or evolve into a fluid ecosystem where players are multi-platform brands from day one? Where media roles are integrated, not questioned. Expansion is collaborative, not territorial. These decisions are happening in real time. Control hasn't disappeared, it shifted. The league controls scheduling, contracts, discipline, and competition. Clark controls audience engagement, cultural momentum, and commercial appeal. Both are powerful, but only one directly influences consumer emotion, and emotion drives revenue. So, is this a power struggle or a growing pain? Resistance or navigation of unprecedented terrain? Leadership's response will define perception for years. Double down on authority or publicly embrace expansion. One path protects short-term structure. The other fuels long-term momentum. Momentum is rare. Timing matters. The warning surfaced during peak acceleration. Women's basketball surging, college ratings climbing, young stars becoming brands, and the Olympics approaching. This should have been a celebration. Clark expanding to a national platform. Instead, the narrative shifted. Expansion, enforcement, opportunity, warning. Nuance rarely survives headline framing. Momentum is fragile. Perception compounds. Media rights rely on projected growth, which relies on momentum trends. If internal friction dominates headlines, uncertainty seeps into negotiations. Olympic crossover potential risks being overshadowed. Off-season narrative-building windows, meant to amplify stars, are now consumed by debate. Energy is pulled from basketball excitement to controversy. In short, the timing amplifies the stakes. The WNBA is navigating uncharted territory. One wrong move could stall momentum, reshape public perception, and influence the next generation of elite talent. Once energy shifts into controversy cycles, it's hard to redirect immediately. Even if the warning was routine, issuing it during a high-visibility growth phase misfires. It feels reactive, not collaborative. In today's media environment, reactive organizations lose narrative control fast. Once the story is framed as league versus star, that framing spreads instantly. Fans are protective during growth. They sense momentum. Any perceived disruption triggers an amplified reaction, like tapping the brakes during acceleration. That's why timing matters. This isn't just a league issuing a warning, it's a symbolic moment, visible at the peak of women's basketball expansion. Division headlines, even temporary, widen perception gaps faster than they can be repaired. The bigger concern: if this becomes a case study, it will shape how the next generation of stars evaluates the WNBA. They won't remember the clauses, they'll remember the feeling, the tension, the caution, the resistance. So where does this go? This moment will resolve in a way that defines the league's future. Minor growing pain, or major power shift. Every league has crossroads like this, moments where leadership must choose to adapt or resist. Underneath the headlines, the reality is clear. Women's basketball is changing. Economics, athlete power, media, and fan engagement are evolving, and Caitlin Clark is at the center of the shift. This isn't about NBC, contracts, or internal politics. It's about evolution. For decades, leagues controlled access. Now stars generate access. Authority is no longer just control, it's collaboration. That transition is uncomfortable, because it requires letting go of absolute grip, and trusting that empowering your brightest star can expand the league, not diminish it. The WNBA faces a simple but critical choice: treat a generational star as a risk to manage or as an asset to unleash. Momentum is rare, unpredictable, and thrives in oxygen, not restriction. If leadership embraces Clark's expansion, this moment becomes a footnote, a growing pain during a transformational era. If tension escalates, enforcement replaces flexibility, and perception hardens, this becomes the moment people reference for years, the moment the league revealed its priorities. Fans have already picked sides. Energy, inspiration, and momentum are attached to a player representing growth and expansion. If the league opposes that momentum, it risks misreading its own audience. Rules still matter, contracts still matter, but how they're applied now determines whether the league protects its future or slows it. This is bigger than one season, one warning, or one endorsement. It's about what kind of league the WNBA wants to become. One that protects hierarchy, or one that accelerates transformation. The next generation, sponsors, networks, and fans are all watching. The spotlight has never been brighter, and every decision now will shape the next decade. So here's the question: if this escalates, where do you stand? Necessary structure, or unnecessary resistance? Draw hard lines, or lean into the moment. Because moments like this define eras, and this era is just getting started. This isn't just basketball. This is business, culture, evolution. And Caitlin Clark may be at the turning point that changes women's sports forever. If you want, I can now combine all your sections into one epic, cinematic, YouTube-ready script with titles, hooks, hashtags, and emojis, fully optimized for virality. It would be a single, continuous narrative that's punchy, dramatic, and binge-worthy.